Hi, YouTube. So, Team Mayhem 3v3 is not around anymore as a going concern, and it seems like Frost Giant Studios itself will not have any ability for Stormgate, its premier game that they took several years to make, $40 million-ish to make. It doesn't look like it's going to be going around anymore. At the end of the month, there's going to be a cutoff of the multiplayer servers, and 3v3, being by its nature a game in which you have teams of 3 against other teams of 3, looks like it's not going to be played by anybody else. Barring some miracle and a Hail Mary at the last second, it doesn't look like anyone is going to play Team 3v3 anymore. Since Frost Giant Studios, through their various employees, agents, and resources have let people know that we can give out our impressions of Team Mayhem, I'm going to do that because I was actually there for not the full portion, but a good portion of Team Mayhem's 3v3 mode. Team Mayhem 3v3 is this casual game mode that was supposed to be a way of accessing people who are not 1v1 hardcore ladder players. It was part of the pillars of Stormgate that was going to make sure that people who didn't want to chase MMR, didn't want to chase rank, have something that they can do with their friends. This is part of the appeal and the promise that Frost Giant Studios made for Stormgate. Since they now say that we can talk about it, I have noticed that there's actually been a dearth of content giving information about what happened in Team Mayhem. What was the gameplay structure? What did people think about it? The most you can get is on our real-time strategy, some people with 2 paragraphs of their quick thoughts, sometimes emojis. There's a very fun GIF that has me in it as the star, by the way, playing inside of it, but there's not a whole lot of video content out there for Team Mayhem, and there definitely isn't a long-form, in-depth discussion about what the gameplay was like. Did people enjoy it? What were the highs and what were the lows? And unlike most things you might expect from Frost Giant Studios, actually, the title says, well, Team Mayhem was a bit of a stilted Zaniness, right? It had good parts, it had bad parts. We're going to go into all of it. So let's start with this. What was Team Mayhem? What was 3v3? Beyond it just being, it's an RTS game mode where you have a team of 3 versus another team of 3. So we're going to get into this. So Team Mayhem was a 3v3 game mode in which each player started the game by selecting a hero. They had one of 3 heroes they could play, right? You could play as Malak, you could play as Castiel, who is unbelievably cool and broken. We'll get to that, and Blockade. And you notice that these match up to each one of the factions, right? This is Infernal, Celestial, and Vanguard. Now, when you got into the game, there was a main core building on the upper left and bottom right side of an enormous map. If your core got destroyed, you would lose the game. That's the basic premise. This is a very MOBA-like framework, but it had a couple of nuances and wrinkles that marked it as different from MOBAs. So one, it didn't really have towers in the traditional sense. Instead, what it had was this enormous map that had 2 main objectives on it. The first main objective it had on it were creeps. That's right, version 1 early access Stormgate creeps. These are things that if you blew them up or if you killed them, you would get extra Luminite. Now, why would you want Luminite? Well, you're passively gaining Luminite the entire game, and you're also getting Luminite for every expansion base that you have made, because your hero is able to build an expansion building so long as you have the money nearby, near an expansion or a base, and then whatever your faction's workers are would come out and be built in an automated fashion, and they would mine for you. So you had multiple sources of income here, and Luminite was the thing that allowed your gold, if you're coming from another game, is what allowed you to build everything in the game, right? Or every unit in the game, right? So the other reason you would go around and kill creeps, because they give you a burst of Luminite, is also some of them gave you Therium. This was true for the mid and hard tier camps, at least at the time that I played. There were 3 tiers of camps. There were green, which were easy to kill, and they only gave Luminite. And then there were yellow and red camps, and these were harder to kill, required a bigger army, which was part of what you used your Luminite for, was building up an army to go with your hero. And you would clear these camps and get additional Luminite for a higher difficulty. You would also get Therium. Therium was a resource that we'll talk about how it gets expended in the economy later. So the first major resource out on the map are creeps. The second major resource out on the maps are these things, at least at the time that I played, called batteries. Now, the idea was that the core was not an invincible building. The core, the nexus, you could think of it as, if you come from a MOBA, if you come from League of Legends, right? This is not an invincible building. You can besiege it, but it has a lot of health, and it's going to take a very long time for you to go and wipe it out. So instead of just just going straight to the enemy base and attacking it, the thing you were meant to fight over, in addition to creeps for additional resources, were these batteries. As you claimed batteries, which are little areas that they're kind of like mini Stormgates are now. They dropped some damage around themselves, and whoever killed the battery got a battery charge. And if you got enough of these battery charges, it fired a big shot from your core, which was a giant cannon, into the enemy core in a volley of 3 hits, and then it did damage to that core. So these are the two things we wanted to claim out on the map with your hero that would help you build your army. So again, you would want to claim creeps, and you would want to claim these batteries. Now let's talk a little bit more about the other thing that you got from creeps. Again, you get Luminite passively as you're playing the game, and you still have to build things in the game. You still have to build buildings so that you can buy new units and different units and send them out. And your hero also is pretty interesting. These are more like the co-op heroes than they were necessarily like some unique version or different version. Again, the heroes, by the way, you could play as Blockade. He was the Vanguard hero. He's very tanky. He had the ability to heal people. He had a spin that he could dash through. Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely, Dorito. There is absolutely going to be a VOD for this. Don't worry. It's going to happen. Like, it's absolutely the case. The second thing is, so Blockade was very tanky and defensive. Now, he had a stun. He had a leaping stun akin to the first campaign, if you played that. He had a spin ability that he could use to gain health over time. Right, he's very defensive and a very core unit. Then there's Malik. Malik is in charge. Yeah, of course, Dorito. It'll be on YouTube as well. Then there was Malik, who was the hero for the Infernal faction. Malik was basically a DPS caster. The best way to think of Malik, if you've been around the Stormgate community, is that he is extremely close to his iteration inside of the MOBA that was created by Delaris, Thanks, and several other people, right? Whose names I'm forgetting right now, but again, they're awesome. The third enemy, so this is a very good, like, ranged DPS character hero, but notably no survivability, very easy to jump on, right? The third hero is Castiel. Castiel has like roving stacks that he gets on top of himself, and he had dash resets, and he had the ability to get more powerful the more of these stacks he built on himself. Don't worry, the story of Team Mayhem 3v3 includes the fact that Castiel was absolutely giga fucking broken every single time that I ever played the mode, but we'll get to that, right? So you have one hero for each of these factions. You pick your hero, and by result, it gives you a faction. Now, it doesn't give you the full faction, because we're talking about the army units now, right? So each of these heroes, also, by the way, very quickly, you also got Therium, the green resource, the Vespene gas equivalent resource, the secondary resource in Stormgate, in Team Mayhem in 3v3 when you killed yellow creeps and red creeps, right? This is part of the reason creeping was so important. The Therium was important because it transformed your regular units into a better version of the unit, usually by giving them a new ability. So for instance, if you don't want medics, but you want medtechs which slow on auto attack, you have to spend Therium for that. You have base level 1 hero abilities. All heroes had a base level 1 version of their abilities. If you're thinking of MOBA in the terms of, oh, there's different stat points and levels and you can increase them. No. Every hero, all of the 3 heroes that I mentioned, have, with the exception of their ultimate, all of their abilities, but they're kind of at like a level 1 proto weaker stage. You could upgrade the strength of any one of those abilities by spending the Therium that you got from all of these creeps. Right? So that's another reason that creeping was extremely good. You also needed Therium because it allowed you to access higher tech tiers. This is particularly important because accessing tier 2, if I remember correctly, gave you the ability to access your hero's ultimate ability. Right? So this is another reason why getting creeps ended up being far more important than the other thing that we're going to talk about later, which is the batteries, right? So these are what your heroes are. Also, the armies that are with them are limited subsection of armies, okay? You don't have, as the Vanguard player, as Blockade, which I played a lot of, you did not have full access to every single Blockade, every single Vanguard unit, okay? There were some units that you did not have or were very different and were more akin to their co-op version than their main version. So, for instance, Blockades didn't really have Lancers. He had guardsmen, or what? Not guardsmen. He had the the Crusaders, I believe they were called, right? Malik had, not Zerg, I keep calling them Zerglings because the one-to-one is too easy, but, Malik had Fiends, and he also had Brutes, but he didn't have normal Brutes, he had the really powerful co-op Fire Giants that do, like, AoE cleaving attacks, so it did give a different vibe, because you were not only playing, by the way, with a hero that was pretty important in a PvP setting, you were also playing with a different subset of units, and the subset of units was close enough to co-op, close enough to PvP that you could see what the inspiration was or what the source was, but it still took you some time to understand what was different about each one of these units. Part of the genius, I think, of Team Mayhem, that's right, this isn't like my Stormgate unworthy successor video where I'm laying out things. There are good things about Team Mayhem, it's just that overall there were negatives as well, which is part of the reason the mode never got out. One of the good intelligent decisions in terms of design that happened for Team Mayhem was that you played with, as I said, you played with a subset of the total units that were potentially the case for that army or for that faction. So you felt like you weren't actually getting overwhelmed by the number of units. If there were 14 units, what a sentence, by the way, Carl Air, what a sentence. But you wouldn't have 14 units. You would only have like 5 or 6 units in your faction. Now, this did mean early on there were some balance issues because some factions were just wholly incapable of dealing with some of the other units, interactions, or heroes of a different faction. But part of that could be said to be on purpose. After all, if the plan eventually was to have not 3 heroes, but 9 heroes, I did see the vision of having the ability for each of those new heroes to occupy in the same faction, in the same, let's say, Vanguard faction, plug different holes of the skill set and capabilities so that each hero feels like it's doing something unique and powerful and relevant, right? Another thing that was very smart about Team Mayhem for the army sizes is that the army size was quite limited. You had a maximum of 100 supply. Sorry, my nose is killing me. One of the benefits of having 100 supply, I'll just say the quiet part out loud because we're not allowed to say, we're supposed to pretend this is not the case, but I want it on the record. I guarantee you part of the reason that you were only allowed to have a 100 supply limit for each of the 3 players is that we all know from the early access that Stormgate had issues rendering or playing or figuring out pathfinding or something. It would start like seizing up anytime that it had too many units on board. This is the big reason why they went from a co-op size of army sizes of 300 to 200. It was exactly the same reason, right? And knowing that, Team Mayhem had sizes of 100. So I've covered the main core structure of the map. I've covered what the resources were you were potentially looking for on the map. We've covered the army, the heroes, right? We've covered a bit of the units and the way the economy works. And there were some other neutral objectives out on the map. Like, the big behemoth thing that is the new tier 3 infernal unit that has this like giant ponderous walk to it and goes like this, that you see in the campaign in mission 1 that Amara and crew have to run away from in the bottom of the facility. Look, if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe this isn't the video for you, but if you're here for all the nitty-gritty details, I implore you to be something more than a bug person, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go look up what I'm talking about for the first mission, because I did not want to make this video take a month to create by putting in a bunch of videos. You're stuck with me and my face and my impressions, and then if you want this to be A-roll content, you've come to the wrong channel. Like, this is a B-roll content stream. You can put this on while you're cleaning dishes or doing some other task you've been ignoring in your life, and just listen to this for an hour or 3 hours or however long I end up going. Right? So this is the basic structure. This is the vision that was inside of Team Mayhem. You will pick one of your heroes, you will group up with random teammates, and then there will be 3 of you against 3 of them. You will all spawn with your heroes next to the core. You will start with a limited pool of Luminite that you can use to either expand or to go ahead and get additional army units. And then you will meet each other probably in points of contestation, such as the yellow and red creep camps that were spawned in the north. Some were spawned in the bottom left, but most were spawned in the upper right-hand side. and you would contest this in sometimes batteries. This was the vision that was planned, and eventually you will get enough of an army lead through your resources in killing creeps, or by collecting enough batteries that you will start firing salvos of damage from your core to your enemy's core, that eventually you will kill the enemy's core, and life will be great. This is a very good setup for Team 3v3 for Team Mayhem. Unfortunately, the video title is Team Mayhem, a Stilted Zaniness, and the reason for that is that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, which I am convinced, by the way, through private interactions I will not share, because they're not appropriate to this video, but just trust me when I say, I do think that the game, the player base became more antagonistic towards, and in turn received more antagonism from developers over the course of this game mode being iterated upon, for reasons that we're going to get into. So it sounds like we've got a great setup so far, but let me drink this, and then you'll understand how things kind of teetered away, what some of the problems were in gameplay. Ah, it's so fucking good. Another reason we're not making this an A-roll content stream, by the way, where I just have a bunch of hyper-edited stuff, is that I'm doing that for another game called Archeron. It seems extremely interesting by Bonfire Studios. It's not an RTS. I've been having a lot of fun with that. So now we get into, where do the cracks start to show up? It looks perfect. We pick a hero. Well, one, there were only 3 heroes. And there was only 1 hero of each race. So if you wanted to play Vanguard, you were stuck with Blockade, which was a more defensive, counter-engaged type hero. If you were looking for some kind of DPS monster, you weren't going to be doing that. So let's start with the heroes, actually. So, well, yeah, heroes first. Okay, the first problem on the outset is that the heroes were horribly imbalanced, and the problem that this generates is that being able to not instantly lose early game scenarios is important. Now, you might be thinking of your favorite MOBAs, right? If you play MOBAs. What stops a 10 versus 90 matchup, like a 1v9 horrid, awful, giga-broken matchup, from meaning that your team immediately loses? Well, in a MOBA, there are defined lanes. There are defined structures through which the enemy team cannot pass through this area. They cannot start beating your ass all the way back to the core, or to the Nexus, or whatever the main area is. They can't immediately force their will upon you and make your gameplay miserable. So this is where we get into a simultaneous problem. The first problem is, one of the heroes, was Castiel, was way more powerful than the other 2 heroes. So Castiel, by the way, had he had dashes, he had attack resets, he had the ability to dash multiple times, he had an ability that made his every auto attack and his damage get higher and higher as he got more stacks and more kills. Now, the reason this started to fracture the player base, but we'll get into the player base fracture later, but all of these things start to seep in together, right? It's like a stew where you can't, it's like a cake, actually, where you can't, like, break the eggs out of the completed cake. These are all kind of baked in and form the layers of the flavor, and the frosting is mixed in with the center and whatnot of this cake analogy. So one of the heroes was extremely brokenly powerful, is Castiel. He had way more movement options than the other heroes. He had way more ability to get out of problems than early heroes, and early game units were not capable, barring full team surrounds, like 3v1ing, of killing this hero. This is important because the weakness of Castiel was supposed to be that when Castiel dies, he loses some of his stacks. So the translation was, if you were playing against someone who was good enough and had enough situational awareness, their stuff would not die, and your hero would be a slightly above average unit. Their hero would be a raid boss. Part of the hero balance also was that Malak, the infernal hero, had extremely terrible survivability. He had very low hit points. A lot of his damage was ranged, and if you've ever played a Brand or someone like that in League of Legends, I want you to imagine a character who has a lot of damage, but struggles to have any CC, any crowd control, anything that can force a disengage or allow him to escape. This meant that there were 2 heroes, Blockade and Castiel, who could always, like, turbo stomp Malak. and Malik could not do anything about it. Now, this is to say nothing of the army units, right? We'll get into that later. Now, one of the problems that this causes is, I've already mentioned, one of the reasons a 1v8, like a 2, in fighting games they call them a matchup out of 10. Like a 5-5 matchup is even, a 6-4 is advantage, but there's still play. And you really don't want there to be a matchup that is 9v1 or 10-0, right? Where it's just outright impossible or borderline impossible for you to stop what's happening. One of the things worth noting is that in MOBAs, the reason that Malik wouldn't get his ass carried and beat all the way back to the beginning of the game is that there would be towers he could hide under, and maybe he would have different strengths that come out later, but require him to not be victim of a minute 1 balance problem. This did not exist in Team Mayhem. The map was extremely open. There was a core, and the core did do some damage in an area around it, but this was more to dissuade the earliest of early game aggression, right? Oh, it's going terribly, Torch. We have to restart. So, for anyone who doesn't know, I was playing Poke MMO, and Misty was given a level 20 instead of a level 21 Starmie, and then none of my stuff evolved. We just got absolutely stomped by a Psy Wave. It was ridiculous. Anyways, going back to the main topic over here. We're not cutting that out, by the way. Well, I haven't played Pokopia. I have no interest in playing it either. But another problem that happened over here with the hero balance is that because there were no lanes, you would just get absolutely bopped backwards over and over and over as Malik, and you would not be able to contend with creeps. This is a big problem because that means because there's only one hero per faction, if you picked Malik, the only way that you would be able to contest anything on the map is if your units were so much better than the other heroes, right? And anyways, moving on from that, right? That's not necessarily what happened. Right? And so you have horrid hero imbalance, and this made it so that one team could have extreme dominance over another team. That's just on heroes, right? Another problem is this idea that I set up before of the map structure suggested that there would be a balance between batteries, which would do damage without sieging the core, and creeps, which you could, contest to get additional abilities or get additional abilities, basically. Get additional Therium, which is for abilities, and additional Luminite. The problem is that there was another benefit to moving out on the map, is that there were bases, there were Luminite mines set up around the map, and you could expand on them. Your hero was kind of a locus of control, a center point, where if your hero was near an area, you could build your equivalent of a command structure next to any place so long as you had money. This was very convenient in terms of you wouldn't have to get a builder, get a worker unit, micromanage it, move it over, build the thing, have it not get harassed, and save it. What this meant, however, is that a lot of these building structures built automatically. They all built as if they were on the celestial warp-in policy, where they didn't need any additional help or guidance. So what you would do is, there were heavier camps up into the northwest. I'm gonna do this so you can see northwest by your perspective, right? So there were 2 heavier camps up towards the northwestern portion, or northeastern portion, I should say, of the map, and there was one set of camps that was to the bottom left. And so what you would do every single time is you would take 2 heroes, 2 people on your team, and move towards the northern part, and you would clear a normal camp, like a green camp for your team, uncontestably, a yellow camp for your team, almost uncontestably, and then there were 2 yellow camps in the upper eastern portion of the map, with a red camp on the other side. And whoever won that initial fight won like 90% of their games, and I'm not exaggerating, right? To the point that the only way that you would guaranteed win is if you took 3 people up. Like, if the reason it worked this way is if you put 1 person up there, they'll get smoked by the 2, and there's double the resources up on that port of the map. So if you didn't get that area, you had no chance of stealing the upper right-hand side. And the resources in the bottom left-hand side of the map were more about expansions, but as I mentioned, expansions give Luminite. This allows you to make units. Creeps, yellow and red creeps particularly, gave you the opportunity to have Therium, which allowed you to get higher tech levels and better abilities on your units and make them more powerful. And you can see how actually this is not a fair balance between the two. More base units when I only have a limit of 100 supply worth of units, and units are taking 3, 4, 6 supply, means I can't actually meaningfully overrun your quality with my quantity. You wouldn't send one person to the upper right because then you would lose to 2 people. If you sent 2 people to the upper right, you actually had to check who the players were that were randomly assigned on your team versus the other team. We'll get into the players in a bit, but let's just say the pool of players that was invited was guaranteed to cause problems and to make testing an absolute nightmare, because it's 2 groups of people who cannot talk to one another in any meaningful capacity. And it's not because of rudeness, it's just because they are entirely separate in their worldview, and they can't possibly relate to one another where they both stand as they pursue games and as they enjoy games as content. If you sent 3 people to the upper right, then you would definitely win the fight, but maybe it wouldn't be worth it if their third teammate is collecting all the resources on the bottom left. Also, that would give their teammate on the bottom left the opportunity to collect a lot of extra bases, which you would then not be harassing or able to deal with. Though, I will say, the idea of harassing bases was a bit of a joke. So we talked about how creeps, basically the positioning of creeps has completely imbalanced the map so that you go 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom, and how actually, because there are no lanes and no towers, it's entirely possible that you have just picked a combination of heroes that is on second 0 incapable of winning that fight in the upper section of the map, which just means that you lose the game. Now, that sounds hyperbolic, like, oh, well, what do you mean? You lose the game if you lose a single fight at 90 seconds into the game? And yes, 80 to 90% of the time, you absolutely would. And that's for a whole host of reasons, part of which is the players, part of which is the comeback mechanics in the game. So, in theory, there were other things to do on the map. In theory, you could send more people to the bottom, and they could claim more expansions, right? But only one player could mine from any expansion at a time. So if you took 3 players and said, we don't care about the creeps at the top, we're going to have so much luminite and so many dirt cheap garbage units that it won't matter. The problem you would run into that is that, yeah, the 3 of you have found 3 bases, but it's actually way better for 1 person to have all 3 of those bases than for all 3 of you to have 1 extra base each, right? It's just, you can't make up the difference in that sense. Now, I also mentioned these batteries, which again, in the upper left and the bottom right-hand side of the screen, I'm doing it correctly. You're the one who's wrong. Listen, I'm not doing theater magic here to make it clear for you guys, but I guess I will. Okay, here we go. So the upper left and the bottom right portions of the screen are your cores, your main, your primary structures. I mentioned these batteries that were around the map that you could navigate towards, and if you claimed the battery, kind of a proto-Stormgate or a Stormgate before they were in Stormgate itself. Why did they call it? Okay, the mini-map objective of the Stormgate was in the map, was in 1v1 after these batteries existed in Team Mayhem, okay? So if we all like confused up the terminology. So I mentioned these batteries. You could capture the batteries, and then if you captured enough of them, they would do damage to the enemy core. Unfortunately, the batteries were a trap for a number of reasons. So the number of batteries required to fire shots from your core was equal to 1 plus the previous amount. And what does this mean? So at the start of the game, both teams only need 1 battery in order to fire 3 shots of damage from their core to the enemy core. But let's say my team claims that battery first. Now, a deliberate comeback mechanic was put in the game, which says that if I have already fired my battery 1 time, now the next time I need 2 batteries in order to fire the shots, but my opponent needs 1. But there was a problem with this. The amount of damage was constant regardless of how many batteries were needed. So if I needed 1 battery to do 3 shots of damage to you, and the other team spent the entire time collecting batteries, and they're at the point where they need 4 batteries, but those 4 batteries do the same amount of damage as 1 battery, well then, they were foolish for collecting that resource, right? Because now I'm at an advantage because I need fewer batteries in order to attack. And so what this meant is creeping did not have this same comeback mechanic to it, where if you were ahead, you got more ahead. Bases did not have this same comeback mechanic, where if you were ahead, you were more ahead. What this means in the version of Team Mayhem I played was, because they were the only thing that operated on a comeback mechanic, paradoxically, battery collection was something that a team that was ahead started doing. To the point that if two teams are fighting, and this team over here is collecting batteries. This team over here knew they were instantly winning because they're getting things that matter immediately. They're getting bases so they can get additional luminite, which will have more value the longer the game goes on. They're collecting all the creeps uncontested, so they're getting all of the bonus luminite from that and the valuable therium that allows them to upgrade their units, upgrade their heroes, upgrade their tech units, right? Give them higher tier levels. And you would think that, oh, okay, well, this team over here, they have that advantage, but this team has done more damage. Unfortunately, core damage does not matter in the game mode. If your core is at 40% health and their core is at 100% health, there is no in-game meaningful difference between them. It's very much like a fighting game in that sense. So Team Mayhem was the special 3v3 casual game mode that they made. The basic rundown, Torch, is that 3v3 was we each have one hero, a limited subsection of possible army units for our faction, and we kind of fight in this MOBA-like game mode where we have to kill each other's core shared structure. Right? That's the idea of Team Mayhem. So this battery that powers up to kill cores, if I damage your core so it's at 40% health, but my team's core is 100% health, it's like health in Street Fighter. It doesn't matter. There's a trope called critical existence failure that says that as you take damage, it doesn't matter. It's just the last hit point that matters, right? And that was the problem with the battery system. So you, in theory, had an advantage because you're attacking the opponent's health bar. And actually, the big UI thing on the bottom, this is a training problem in every single game that has health bars or has these kind of resources. Magic the Gathering has the same problem with life, where in theory, in Magic the Gathering, if I have 12 life and you have 20, because most people in my country, where I'm American, they follow sports where if Team A has bigger number than Team B, Team A is winning. But in Magic the Gathering, you have to tell people, actually, that player has 13 life, and you have 20, but you're a burn deck and they're a control deck. So even though locally you're winning by 7 life, that life total is not actually the determinant of who wins the game. It's just who hits 0 first. And actually the state of the game is such that you're gonna hit 0 first because they didn't die because you're the beatdown, you're the aggressor. So much the same thing happened here in terms of Team Mayhem. There would be teams who are advised or told collect batteries that does damage to the opponent's core, and what would happen is they would do some damage to the enemy's core, but now they have no creeps, they have no expansions, they have much lower tech level and economy, and the reward for all of this is that it now takes them 4 batteries to start damaging the opponent. Now, what happens when the stronger team that collected all of those much more pertinent, much more relevant resources flips the script and they say, we're going to collect batteries? Because of the intention of the design, yes, it's placebo damage, exactly. Because the intention of the design was for these batteries and core shots to be a comeback mechanic, it meant that the team that started going after them last had an advantage. Because if I need 4 of them to do the same damage to you that you only need 1 of to do damage to me, but you have all of these other benefits that you picked up in the early game, I'm not going to lose. I'm going to giga lose. In fact, I'm actually digging myself a hole from which I'm not going to be able to escape. Now, we talked about the game, like these batteries are basically not nearly as good as creeps. There was one other objective that was definitely worth it, and it was the Behemoth or the Devourer or whatever you want to call it, I forget the name that they provided, which was in the center of the map. Now, you might have asked earlier, why was creeping with 2 people on the top so good? Surely there were other metas or counterplays or counteractions, and I would say to you no, and the reason for that is the upper right did have a higher density of creeps, right? And I suspect it was secretly a bit closer and had more creep density going towards that. But if that was all it was, there would have been counterplay, there would have been counteractions, there would have been a metagame evolution. The problem is that immediately south into the west of that, so again, like we're here from my perspective, okay, we'll do it from your perspective. Here's the upper right portion of the screen, right, where these creeps are. And then there's this section, which is where all the expansions and another group of creeps are. Now, in theory, those 2 places are equal because distribution of batteries, distribution of creeps, right? Distribution of expansions. In theory, these are weighted equally. In practice, they were not, because just south of this, I'm using the camera, it's a bit hard. Just south of this area where all these creeps are, about over this way, right, noticeably closer to the upper right quadrant of the map than any other quadrant, was where a giant boss monster spawned. I want you to think of, unfortunately, I'm one of the few people who has actually played Guardians of Atlas, so it was basically the demon from Guardians of Atlas. If you haven't played that and you've played like League of Legends, I want you to think of Roshan or Baron, but the difference is that instead of killing it, giving you a team buff, when you kill it, if you then capture the kill, as it were, that thing becomes an uncontrollable boss monster that roams towards your opponent's core and starts damaging it very heavily. So if you capture it, it's not just a buff. It is also a giant hit point bulwark your opponent has to focus down that you can basically hide behind because it does too much damage, and then it would swing at people. Now, this got really weird really fast because the first iteration, yeah, Pepe Hands, exactly. The first generation of this Devourer, this mid area, this Roshan-like entity, right? The first iteration didn't have a whole lot of hit points. So killing it was just something that teams did, right? And then the second version was extremely powerful to the point that like your enemy team needed 2.5 or 3 armies purely focusing on that, which almost always led to the end of the game, by the way, because if there's a monster that spawned on your side of the map going towards your opponents that they need 3 armies in a 3v3 game to contest, well, then I could just take our 3 armies and attack the core as well. And now you would need to have 6 armies worth of stuff to kill that monster and kill our armies while we siege the core, right? And this is part of where that stilted zaniness gets in. So as the metagame evolved, as people got better and started playing more, people realized killing that Devourer, killing that Behemoth was actually not good. If you killed the Behemoth, it would respawn into a better one that could win the game. And the first Behemoth had almost no chance of ending the game. So if you're the team that's ahead, you would deliberately camp that Behemoth to not kill it so that the other team doesn't even have a chance of coming back into the game. And this is actually a series of things where coming back into the game is extremely difficult, bordering impossible on Team Mayhem. To the point, by the way, this is one of the worst things about Team Mayhem. So I would say all these things that I've set up, this is genuinely the case. If you were playing with a decent mix of players and you were not actively calming, you were just playing the game, it was actually pretty fun. It really was. There's so many things to capture. There's so many creep places to go. You're not organizing the team play amongst each other. You're not doing things like there was a bug for a while where dev to try and hop on the MOBA train in 2026 is so strange when the train has left the station and the station is closed. I think what the problem is that a couple of games did it very well, but we are now going through a rotation where people don't want to play PvP games. I actually liken it to something that I learned years ago about the free-to-play game market. So one of the problems with the free-to-play game market is it was fantastic and a huge moneymaker and ballooned the gaming industry for people. I don't think it was great in terms of the quality of games coming out, but if you only care like some mammon-possessed asshole about dollar in versus dollar out, where they lose money and you get money, free-to-play was great for game studios and companies. But the problem is that it got saturated, and the problem with saturation is that there's only so many free-to-play games you can have. This is the same problem MMOs had, right? Why do WoW killers not happen? Because unfortunately, people already have their one MMO that they play. Maybe 2. If it's like their favorite genre, maybe they have 2 that are really good and they care a lot about. This is where you see a lot of the love for like something like Guild Wars 2, right? Or people getting all up and hyped up 10 years ago on the Wildgate train. Right? They're like, oh, but actually this other game is my genre, but it fixes the things I like about my main game. But notice, MMOs run on expensive purchases and subscriptions. You can only have a couple of those before you look at your subscription and realize, well, what the fuck am I doing with all this money? Like, I'm not even playing the game I'm not playing 400 hours a month of this MMO. Yeah, I have played a lot of StarCraft 2. I got M3 in StarCraft 2 as Terran. I wouldn't say I'm great, right? But what I'm getting at with this, right, is So MMOs already discovered this. It's Highlander rules. There can only be one, maybe two, if people are very invested and that is the game type they care the most about and they don't care about other games or genres or releases whatsoever. Because it's just too expensive in terms of time and money otherwise. After that, free-to-play discovered the same thing. There's only so many free-to-play titles that people can have before they start to notice that they're losing $240 a month on there or way, way, way more, right? Because of the cost associated to free to play. And yeah, while I said Wildgate, I meant WildStar. Yeah, WildStar is what I actually meant. I played a lot of Wildgate. It had a lot of the same problems that I'm going to go over into terms of players and PvP and actual structured play in Team Mayhem. So what I'm getting at with this comparison, if you're following the trend, is like MMOs and then like free-to-play, we are now at the point where PvP competitive games have the same problem, because it's actually much less expensive than MMOs and free-to-play games for you to be part of multiple PvP games and try really hard in them. But even so, it's so mentally taxing and requires such focus, especially if you think you're going to be a team, you're going to get money, there are tournaments, etc., that most people, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about all the semi-pros out there who are hopping from game to game and collecting money because that's what they have to do to make a living. I mean, like most normal people, right? They can't play that many PvP games. It's too taxing on them to do it. Being bad is too painful for them to want to do it. Oh, look, it's someone we're gonna ban. Oh, that's sick. Oh, wow. Let's see. We click your name. Wow. And then we ban you. Wow. Crazy concept. Get the fuck out of here, bot. So anyways, yeah, this is definitely going to be like a not for children video when it goes over onto YouTube, because we are just going to rip this whole thing and then send it over there. The reason that I mention, right, all of this with Team Mayhem is that actually Team Mayhem was extremely fun if you were just playing with a group of people randomly, because in theory, thank you for the follow, Winsboy, in theory, this is like a very robust, interesting, fun gameplay experience that attracts people who are just playing in this I even used the word zaniness in this title, this like zany, helter-skelter, thrown together, cobbled up mess of a game. But it all goes to shit as soon as you start putting it together. And this is actually a problem that I myself have had as a person who is like trying to design board games on Tabletop Simulator, and I've seen a lot of people struggle, especially in the board game space. It's a lot more prohibitive still to get into video games than it is into board games. But I've been to a lot of conventions and the same things happens. There are a lot of rules set up inside of Team Mayhem that in theory are fun. Everyone's picking a hero, limited subset of armies, wild map with a bunch of stuff going on it, a lot of random things to go and pursue and achieve, right? People can be pursuing different objectives at the same time. Unfortunately, that was ideal Team Mayhem. That was ideal 3v3. Any actual gameplay experience amongst people quickly fell flat and shattered for two big reasons, actually. The first reason is just we're going to talk about the players, okay? This is not, okay, I want to say, I'm not a semi-pro, and I have never been a professional in any game. The closest that I've ever been is I have gotten some invites and skipped a couple of rounds in in Magic the Gathering for Grand Prix back when they did those, and I am ranked in terms of In the Groove or ITG, but I would not be considered a top player at any point, not even to even say I was semi-pro or paying any portion of my living expenses for those would be an absolute joke. So understand where I'm sitting skill-wise when I tell you. The overwhelming majority of people who were fascinated and attracted to the idea of Team Mayhem were not people like me. There were actually two groups of people. The first group is extremely casual players from an RTS perspective. And what I mean by casual is not that they're garbage, shit, disgusting human beings, sub-lower life forms whose opinions can be invalidated out of hand. What I mean is they're casual. They've probably never broken the 50% ranked mark in whatever their RTS of choice is. They're playing it because they're here for the social fun. They're playing because they want to play an enjoyable team play experience with other people. And this sounds like the kind of wild and fancy free bit of enjoyment that they're looking for. that would not be a problem. Every ladder has always distributed those people where they want to go, and almost every game that has a ladder has an unranked mode, which sends those people, frankly, to the bottom of the barrel. But that's fine, because something that really strong players don't understand is that casual players are fine being that. They have other things they do in their life. I think mostly casual players are the kinds of people who, regardless of what involvement they have in terms of their like intellectual curiosity, a lot of them are playing a video game or even a ranked mode with the same attention that a previous generation would get home from work and watch Law and Order, right? They're not there like they're not watching Law and Order like a script writer would to see the character interplay and the scene transitions. They're just watching it because it's a fun story and it's vaguely in the wheelhouse of what they're interested in, and they know it's got a certain quality level that they're expecting, and it's part of their routine. This would normally, oh yeah, how you described, yeah. No, I'm sorry, Evariste. Let's not talk about how I watched Law and Order. Now, Torch, how you described your peak in MTG is basically verbatim for my peak in Super Smash Bros. Yeah, I never played Melee at a good level. I was at one point a 17 million GSP Jigglypuff, just because I thought Hungrybox, like, trolling the shit out of people in Melee was a lot of fun. But that's not the point, right? The problem is, I've described this first batch of people, and they're playing for fun. And when I say they're playing for fun, I don't mean I have this theory, and it's borne out true over decades of playing these games, is that if you get mad when you lose, you're not playing for fun. You're just a shit competitive player. Now, a lot of people are going to get really mad when they hear that, but genuinely, if you get mad when you're losing, right, and it's because you're getting dog walked by somebody, that's because you're an extremely bad competitive player. But I want you to understand the people who are playing that were of this skill level that I'm describing in Team Mayhem in 3v3, they were genuinely casual players. And I don't mean bad competitive players. I mean, this is just fun for them. This is something they want to do to help grow the community, see their intellectual curiosity be sated, participate in something, get a sneak peek, right? Have a bit of fun. Genuinely. I know that's extremely hard for this next group of people to understand, but I have been where those people are, and I have not been where those people are, even though the strong players are, even though I've talked to lots and lots of them. And on average, my opinions trend towards their side, right? I'm trying to like provide some fucking like Rosetta Stone translation, because the second group of people, say what it is, Torch. The second group of people who were in the Team Mayhem were all of the people who desperately wanted this to take off because they wanted to make teams and shit stomp people and for there to be tournaments and for them to win. They were there to break the game. Now, again, if you're a more casual person, you're going to think that I'm saying, he's absolutely on our side because it was a beautiful, blissful pleasantry land. It was the fields of Elysium, and we had all been earning our spot there. And these fucking tryhards come in there with their metagame and their analysis and their Discord calls, and they just fungal all of it up and ruin it. Okay, extremely good players like competition. This is something that more casual players... Okay, bad competitive players intuitively kind of get this. Casual players never understand this, which is extremely good players, people who are at like the top 0.01% of whatever their field is. Almost all of them have stopped loving the game. What they have learned to love instead, and this is why they trend towards being extremely successful in life once they get over playing games. And I'm not saying that's because that's what growing up is, it's just whatever their life trajectory is. Those people love competition. They love competition more than they love the game that they're playing. They love that the game is a vector and a vehicle for them to discern how accurate their perception of the game is, how accurate their perception of their own skill and ability to learn, ability to execute is. Right? Yes. Yeah. This is like what you were saying, Torch, about what, I'll just read it here. So what Artosis said in Brood War during a cast where he said, I suppose you could just be playing for fun, but I have no idea what that would look like or feel like. Yeah, absolutely. Now you can see immediately how this is going to be a massive problem. Oh yeah, wasn't Team Mayhem categorized to be a competitive game mode where it was placed in game menus with the ranking, and the setup selects against the masses from the onset? The problem is that these two groups of people normally never meet each other. Right? This is like, there's a theory that's called The Office According to The Office. I forget who made it, but it's a brilliant insight in how companies run. And one of their analysis, like one of their pieces of analysis, is that you can't have people who realize that having a job is a joke and they're just meant to escape it as best as they can with like hard charging CEO types. You almost need middle management to like grease the wheel between those two people, because unfortunately high level people speak in a language of power play and talk, and it really works well amongst themselves. But it doesn't work well against people at the bottom of a totem pole, at the bottom of a ladder, because those people have basically given up and understand where they are. And the people at the bottom of the distribution know, listen, I need to get where that person is, and I'm willing to be a scumbag or lazy or take a shortcut or whatever I can to get where they are, because the only difference between me and them is that they've made it and I have not, right? So you need the people in the middle. There were no people in the middle in Team Mayhem. You had some extremely bad competitive players, but mostly casual players, talking with people who are legitimately semi-pro or better, or at such a high skill level or skill threshold that from a casual or bad competitive player's perspective, they couldn't tell the difference. I don't much like him, but Destiny made an excellent point to the majority of the player base in StarCraft 2 years and years and years ago, where he said that if you just hid the names and you got a bunch of people and you lied to them and you put on like North American top 50 GM ladder games and you changed the nameplates, those people wouldn't be able to tell what was happening. Now, what was funny is that a lot of analysts at the time said, no, I would be able to tell. And it's like, yeah, you would be able to tell, but the average gold player would not be able to tell. I think IMLS has even said something like a person who is the equivalent skill level in their game as to what a Diamond League player is in League of Legends is so good that you could fool a normie that is the peak skill distribution of the game. Right? Yeah, when I hear all the meta, corporate, lucrative for-profit talk and work environments, it's completely disconnected. Yeah, not part of your game, leave me out of it. A lot of that is because people, according to I think it was Ricky Gervais who said this, but according to that person, people in the middle of that skill distribution they talk in a language that is meant to grease the wheels for both sides without them understanding that is what their role is. Now, what I'm getting at with this is that this made gameplay of Team Mayhem a fucking nightmare, because listen, when everyone is just having fun, it's totally cool. When people are on Discord calls and hard calming and figuring out metagame builds and stuff, this makes it impossible for casual players to exist. They are like the little koi fish who just had a gallon of bleach dumped in because the pool is going to be treated for Olympic swimmers. That's fucking fire. How'd I come up with that? That's gas, actually. That's unbelievably top tier as a reference. But yeah, that's the best way of describing it. These casual players were koi fish in a pond, and gallons upon gallons upon gallons of bleach were dumped into the water so that Michael Phelps could have really good times in something that hit a competitive environment. Yeah. Red Bull gives you metaphors. Yeah, exactly. Hey, Red Bull, hit me up with this. You want this kind of wordplay? Listen, I got the spirit of anger and aggression right here, right? I'm fucking seeing red right now, right? Yeah, that's right. No capes get in front of me. No Matador's gonna do a swift one over me. We just going in hard. My God. Not that Red Bull does sponsorships for people with 11 viewers on stream anyways. So, moving forward. What this meant is that the game was completely unplayable, because sometimes you would have games where, there's a short-term effect and a long-term effect. The short-term effect is that you just counted the number of good players on both teams, and if they weren't equal, the team with more good players won. And I don't mean people like me, right? I'm talking about like God, I don't even know if they want their names out there. Let's just say extremely good people that you would consider semi-pro who have won prize money in other games, particularly, let's say, RTS or RTS adjacent games. Yeah, Senna says Albino, Mixu, LOL, right? There's a lot more names like this. And by the way, I have respect for a lot of those people because they helped me on my own side project and on my tournaments, and I know that this is what they hunt for, and they like the competitive side of games. But what I'm getting at is you would just count, and if it was one-on-one, it was doable. If it was like 2-on-1, but there were two people who were not technically semi-pro, but were like, I shit you not, like Hapsaya or Arail Stormgate, like Arail TV or people like that, where they're like extremely good, but they're just shy of that level, or they would be considered just shy of that level, then maybe it was doable, maybe it was possible, right? But someone like me had no business changing the values that were there. Senna, since you're here, I'm just going to suggest that people like you and I basically don't move the needle on how many good, quote, good players there are inside of that game state. So you would just count, and whoever has more of the three of them wins. Now, that was the short-term effect. And that also there's an in-game effect that comes with the short-term effect. So the short-term effect is you would know who won or lost at the 0-second mark. This is demoralizing as shit to play. The second thing is, remember all those things that I talked about where there's no means of coming back into the game? Oh, no, you didn't, because I haven't gone into it yet. So basically, every single thing in the game, with the exception of batteries, was a ramping advantage pool. There was no, if you're playing League of Legends, there's no shutdown gold, right? If you're playing some other MOBAs or like a Supervive or something like that, there's not increasing death timers, right? There's not an ability to kill your opponents like an Archeron when I'm playing now, where if you do win, you kill them, like you might be behind and fight another player who's behind, but you kill them, you get their stuff, and now you might actually be equal to other people, even though they're better than you, by killing a worse player, right? Even that is a limited form of comeback potential. There are also in-game things that make comeback potential not work. So first off, bases, remember those bases that I said you could just set up and expand? They're extremely tanky, very hard to kill. In fact, in terms of, now here's the thing, globally, not hard to kill. It's not like you're chipping at, I don't know, Mount Rushmore with a pickaxe, right? That's not what's the problem. The problem is that you would have to send the amount of forces you would have to send across the map, which was enormous, by the way. So you had to invest travel time. You had to take the short-term loss of travel time and the replacement loss, right? The comparative disadvantage of not pursuing other objectives to send enough of your army that it could quickly kill an enemy base. If you killed the enemy base, you would find out that the buildings had so many hit points that it actually just wasn't worth doing in terms of a time invested problem. Especially because heroes can build buildings automatically, and they built by a celestial style warp-in. So you would finally spend the time, kill a base, your opponent would come by, they would just drop another expansion and then leave 1 second later, and the base would rebuild by itself. So you took the huge opportunity cost of trying to do this, succeeded, which is extremely difficult, and then they would just run away. This led to the metagame for killing bases disappearing. If a base got set up, it basically never died unless your team was getting shit stomped and you were losing the game. What happened is people would start sending small numbers of units to attack the workers that were positioned at each of these bases. What the fuck? There we go. Okay, we're back. Well, basically, in case it like skipped for a second, you would send small numbers of units to go attack the enemy bases, not to kill the bases, but to kill the workers. And the problem with killing the workers is that you would lose real units that cost Luminite to kill these workers. The workers automatically rebuilt and didn't cost Luminite. So basically, harassment of bases just was almost non-existent. And the other problem with this kind of non-existence of harassment is that you weren't just attacking a base. You were attacking a base that had multiple, again, once there is an area that a base is claimed, you can build around the base without your hero being there. So you would see a base get built. Once the base was built, static defense would fucking blossom like a flower in the summer of the southeastern part of the United States, just explode all over the base, making airtight walls. So you would have to send ridiculous numbers of forces to kill these static defenses. And your reward for doing that was that you were never killing the base, right?